I so appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to talk about this important topic of the emotions in education. I'm Dr. Lisa Sanden, and I am a Montessori teacher and a consultant, and I'm also a workshop leader and presenter. And here at the Wright Foundation for the Realization of Human Potential, I'm a coach and a lab leader, and I also do the weekends. So I received my master's and my doctoral degrees at the Wright Graduate University for the Realization of Human Potential. And at WGU, with every course that I was in, and at WGU we study, my clicker's not working. Thanks, James. Oh, awesome. Well, I'm going to go on anyway. So at WGU, we study the 6 core disciplines of developmental psychology, Adlerian psychology. We study existential thought. We study humanistic thinking and technologies. And we also study educational theorists and methodologies and neuroscience and current research. Thank you so much. And with each one of these core disciplines that I was studying, I would say to myself, oh my goodness, this sounds so much like what Dr. Montessori wrote about. And in fact, the way that we learn at the Wright Graduate University is also very much in line with how we learn in Montessori. And within these 6 core disciplines at the Wright Graduate University, the topic of emotional intelligence is very, very tightly woven in. And in addition, the Wright Graduate University has a requirement that in order to get a degree, you have to demonstrate that you have transformed yourself and that you are actually living what you are learning in your life. So that makes it a very unique degree. Now, I'm here to talk to you about the importance and power of emotions in education. Whether you're a teacher in Montessori or a teacher in some other methodology, or maybe you're not even a teacher, but you were once a child and you were learning yourself, I think most of us have had this experience of what a potent emotional crucible a classroom is. And Andy Hargraves said it really well. He said, teaching is an emotional profession. And indeed it is. In my work as a consultant at Montessori schools, teachers tell me that they feel tremendous love for the children. They say that they feel that they are contributing to humanity one child at a time. They say that they find immense meaning in their work and that it has given their life true purpose. In fact, I know several people who came from banking or other business type professions and were not fulfilled in those professions. They wanted to make a greater contribution, so they actually went and took Montessori training and had a big career shift midway. My research also indicated the powerful feelings that teachers have. They feel so much joy and so much love and so much care for their children. And this is really a part of the power of emotions in education, because it provides such a welcoming and inviting environment for the children to be learning, but it is also important for our fulfillment that we have these beautiful relationships. Some teachers in my study even said that it's a lot like being a parent, that we feel joy, we feel love, we feel excitement, and we also feel frustrated and angry and burned out and hurt at times and even afraid at times. And this is really what we're talking about today, because most of us don't know how to use fear, hurt, anger, frustration. We don't really know their power for our benefit or for the benefit of the children that we work with. We think that that's something to hide or ignore. So that's really what we're talking about today. And that's why I did my study, because I was having all these very powerful emotional experiences in the classroom, and I thought surely other people were too. And it turned out that they were. And I wanted to better understand how to address these feelings in myself. It was sometimes very challenging, and I wanted to know better how to regulate my emotions so that I didn't feel so burned out, so frustrated, and then so also unhappy with myself if I would fail to hide the emotions that I thought that I should hide. I remember in my first couple of years of teaching, I would end all fun that I was having at about noon or 1 on Sunday because I had to just like decompress and prepare myself for the coming week. And I want to say it wasn't that I was bad at my job. I was good at what I was doing, and other people told me so. So it must be true. And yet it wasn't that, but I had all these heightened emotions. And I was very, very well prepared to give the Montessori lessons, and I was well prepared to be with the children. I was not well prepared to be with myself, and I wasn't prepared to address the feelings that I was having, and particularly the bad emotions. Most of us in our culture have a belief that certain emotions are bad and that we need to hide them. And we believe that other emotions are good. Oh, there's only one, joy, and that's the one that we have to display. And I found myself as a teacher, sometimes I was just suddenly really angry, and it was not really very understandable to me. I couldn't grasp why I was so angry. Sometimes I would start at 0 and I would go to 60 in just a couple of minutes. Of course, it was only internally. It was not displayed on the outside. But then I would try to put on the face that I thought that I should have. And when you feel like this, but you really know that you should feel like this, what you look like is this. And that's frightening. And if you look at children when you're faking being happy with them this way, they look exactly like they look like this. They're terrified of it. And it actually shows in the research that faking emotions is perceived by others as being threatening. Sometimes I actually found myself feeling afraid as well. I was afraid of the parents. I was afraid of my boss sometimes. Sometimes I was afraid of the children. And my deepest fear was that I was inadequate, that I would just never really be the kind of person that I believed that I had to be in order to be a good Montessorian. And I was sometimes hurt. The parents would criticize me to my boss, rarely to my face. They would sometimes ask to have children removed from my classroom. Of course, I didn't really celebrate when families asked to have their children put into my classroom. I only noticed when they wanted them removed. And I was hurt sometimes when I had particularly thoughtfully prepared a lesson for the children, and it was really quite glorious. And then they just didn't care, and they wouldn't repeat it. And I was hurt by that. And I was emotionally exhausted, I felt burned out, and I didn't know that I could do it for very long. And I just wasn't prepared for confronting myself. In fact, I had, for some reason in my training, believed that Montessori would somehow help me with myself, and that it would be somehow magical. And it turned out not to be magical. And what I didn't know was that this phenomenon of having to hide certain emotions and only express others, that it had a name. It's called emotional labor. And I'd never heard of that before. And I will talk quite a bit about that in a few minutes. I also didn't know that there was anything that I could do about it. I'd had exposure as a young child to a lot of what we study at the Wright Graduate University. I'd had exposure to developmental psychology, humanistic thinking, existentialism, way back in the 1970s. But I had no practical application for those beautiful technologies until I came to the Wright Foundation and the Wright Graduate University and started taking their courses. And that was when I actually began to fulfill what I believe was Dr. Montessori's vision of the teacher developing themselves alongside the children. She called it the preparation of the adult. We also know we can't dump these feelings on the children. That's clear. We can't dump them on the parents. That doesn't work very well. Many teachers that I've talked to also don't feel that they can express these feelings, these negative emotions, to their boss. Because if they tell their boss they're afraid or that they're hurt, they're afraid their boss will think, oh, they're weak. They can't handle the job. Maybe I shouldn't have hired this person. And so we don't really have a vehicle. In many cases, it's not true. There are some schools that do have more of this than others. But here's what Dr. Montessori said. So there's a couple of things. First of all, she said that anger is a sin. So who would ever readily admit, if you're a Montessori teacher, to being angry? You just wouldn't, because she said this. But she said that a teacher must study herself so that she can tear out her most deeply rooted defects. And she said that the teacher should learn about herself from her contact with the children. And this is really beautiful, and I agree with her. But there was no direction how. I kept turning to my albums and turning to what I had learned, but what does that mean, and how do I really do it? That was the question. And so that was really what my dissertation research was about. And when I was doing this research, really looking for who was doing deep thinking about teachers and their emotions, I came across this theory of emotional labor. And when I started reading about it, it was like stadium lights went on for me. It was so illuminating to what I was experiencing. It explained my exhaustion. It explained my burnout. It explained how stressed I felt. And it explained why I was hiding certain feelings and only displaying others, in addition to the rules that I had learned in my family about emotional display. I also, there were rules at school about what was okay and what was not okay. Emotional labor is the management of feeling in order to create a publicly observable facial and bodily display to elicit a particular response in the customer. Now, the customer is the child, in this case, the child, or it's the parent. The customer could be our boss. We want our boss to think a certain thing about us. And really, in much simpler terms, it's at work, you have to hide certain feelings, and you have to show others, regardless of what's actually happening inside of you. There are 3 elements of emotional labor, and I'm going to talk briefly about all of them, and then I will come back to talking about some of them more in depth. So the first one is surface acting, and surface acting is the most stressful, and it's exactly what you think it is. It is pretending on the surface. There's no depth involved. You're just faking it. And we fake having emotions that we don't have. And in my study, the teachers said that the emotion that they faked the most often is joy. And one said, even on a really bad day, I have to pretend to be excited about trilobites. We also suppress and hide the emotions that we're not supposed to have. And in my study, the emotion that was most commonly suppressed was anger, of course. Does anybody else in education find that you fake either feeling joy, or you hide your anger, or you fake other emotions in some way? On the web, if you would like to write a little something in the chat, please feel free to go ahead. I would love to hear from you. They'll type it up on my little screen up here. So I'll talk a little bit more about surface acting in a few minutes. I want to go on to deep acting. Deep acting is not as stressful. This is about doing the internal work necessary so that what you feel is what you're supposed to feel, that your external matches your internal. Deep acting can involve reappraising your emotions. It can involve modification, like down-regulating, it can involve up-regulating, and proactive coping is another element of deep acting. Proactive coping for me has shown up where I know that with a particular child, I always feel, let's just say, angry. So I am going to plan for the next week to have certain experiences with this child so that I have a new model for how I can feel with him. I'm proactively anticipating and coping with how I typically feel. Someone on the web says, yes, thank you, Dan, that anger is on top of hurt and sadness. We will get to that in a moment, Dan. And really, at core, deep acting is about coming to a deeper understanding of yourself. It's about starting to understand the source of your emotions, really being able to be more fully yourself and to cope with your feelings and your history and everything that comes up in the classroom internally, and also using support. So the third element of emotional labor is the expression of naturally felt emotions. This is the least stressful. This is where you're congruent, you're authentic, you are flowing and freely expressing what is most true for you in the moment, and you're in that sense of flow with the children and everything feels great. I have that experience quite a bit, actually, and I know many other teachers have that experience where this just feels right. There's a right feeling about it. Anybody else ever have that experience? On the web, go ahead and let me know. Yep, felt fear in the first year of being in a Montessori class, so this is something that people do feel. So I want to talk more about surface acting because surface acting has significant consequences. Researchers show that teachers of all sorts do surface acting, but importantly that they see it as a failure of their character that they have to do surface acting, that there's something wrong with them, that they have to fake their emotions. Teachers who use suppression or surface acting as their primary means of coping as opposed to deep acting, they experience a far greater degree of burnout in their profession. And emotional suppression, after all, is exhausting. It recruits the frontal cortex, which is used in executive control. It's essentially willpower. We have to use our willpower to do this surface acting. And willpower has been shown to get depleted. We only have so much. I can only not eat that piece of chocolate cake for so long. And it's the same thing. I can only hide my feelings or pretend a feeling for so long because that gets exhausted. Now, emotional suppression has significant health costs and social costs as well. Suppressing emotions has no observable impact on the experience of the emotion. None whatsoever. It increases activation in the cardiovascular system. Suppression of emotions is costly to memory. This was the kicker for me. It increases the blood pressure of the people around you. So if you're in a classroom and you are suppressing your emotions rather than really doing the deep work necessary to understand yourself, the children's blood pressure is going up. Shocking, right? There's a lot of, for those of you on the web, a lot of people in the classroom are saying, wow. Yeah. The other main consequence is that you get decreased social support, because if you're hiding how you feel, you are less likely to get help from friends or colleagues for that particular feeling. So there's a name for that. They call it safety-seeking behaviors. I better not show that. I better not show it. So in other words, how we address our emotions really, really matters. I want to talk briefly about burnout. Burnout is known to be associated with emotional labor, particularly with surface acting. Burnout includes emotional exhaustion, which we've talked about. It includes depersonalization, sort of lumping all the members of a particular group together. So for me and for other teachers I know, it's, oh, the parents. You no longer see them as individuals, or of the 4-year-old boys in the classroom, or it might be the 6-year-old girls, or we cease seeing people as individuals and only see them as a member of a group. It also includes reduced personal accomplishment. And while there are no studies on burnout in Montessori teachers, there are a number of articles that include mention of burnout as a factor for Montessori, and it is widely, widely studied in, say, the public setting. The alternative to emotional labor. What is the alternative? It can't just be all bad news. So the alternative to it is having greater emotional facility, which means having a greater repertoire of how you address your emotions so that you're not just suppressing them. And it involves coming to this deep understanding that I've mentioned of what's actually happening inside of me so that we can address that and seek to do something different. Now, our emotional facility is largely determined in our early childhood, just like other aspects of our personality. But it is possible, because of brain plasticity, that with hard work, with a plan, with support, and with consistent effort, we can increase our emotional facility, which is what I began to do at the Wright Foundation about 13 years ago, and it really dramatically changed the trajectory of my teaching. This is a model of the 4 directions of emotional facility that was developed by Dr. Judith Wright, who is one of the founders of the Wright Graduate University, and she's also, of course, one of the professors. And the 4 directions are in, out, up, and down. And we're going to talk actually quite a bit about in and a little bit about the others for just a moment. So the in's direction of emotional facility, it's being able to be in touch with and aware of what's happening inside you. And it's also being able to identify with and understand what's happening inside of others. Because if you don't know what's happening inside of you, it's very hard to make that identification. So in the room and on the web, we're going to do a little exercise on developing a greater emotional awareness. So make sure you're sitting comfortably, whether you're on the web or in the room. And when you feel ready, I'd like you to close your eyes. On the web, go ahead and close your eyes. I promise there's nothing to see. So just take a nice deep breath. Let yourself just relax into this moment. And now find a time in your life when you felt afraid. Just go back in time to a moment that you felt afraid. And start to notice what's happening inside of yourself in that moment. What's happening with your posture? What are your thought patterns? Do you have any sensations in your chest or your gut? What's happening with your hands, your feet? Really pay attention to what being afraid feels like. Just another minute, moment. And now take another deep breath and let that go. And now find a time in your life that you felt hurt. And really pay attention to what that sensation of hurt is like. Notice your thought patterns, what happens in your posture. Notice any feelings or movement in your facial muscles, your chest, your stomach. Really just pay attention. What does that feeling of hurt feel like? And now take another deep breath, a nice slow one, and let that go. And see if you can find a moment that you were angry. Really angry. And again, pay attention to what's happening inside of you. Notice your thoughts. If there's anything new happening in your hands, did your posture change? Notice any sensations in your chest, your gut, your shoulders, what's happening in your arms and your hands. Just notice what anger feels like. Now take another deep breath and find a time that you felt sad. And again, notice what's happening inside of you. Notice what it feels like to be sad, what your thought patterns are, what happens in your posture, in your chest, your gut, what happens around your face, your mouth. Really notice what this feels like. Another deep breath. Let that go. And now find a time that you felt joy. Notice what happens in your face, posture, your thinking. What happens when you're joyful? What happens to your heart rate, your gut, your chest, your shoulders? What happens when you feel joy? Really pay attention to what joy feels like. Then take one more deep breath. Then gently, keep your eyes closed, but gently rub your hands together. I know it's already warm in the room, but if you're in a room on the web that's cold, and then put your hands over your eyes and open your eyes into your hands so that the transition to the room isn't so stark from that eyes-closed experience. This is the inn of emotional facility. Being aware of what the 5 primary emotions of fear, hurt, anger, sadness, and joy feel like. So anybody either in the room or on the webcast have some deep memories or deep feelings come up? Anybody get close to falling asleep or start to nod off? That happens sometimes, yes. Anybody have a feeling that they couldn't identify? There was no moment that they had that feeling. All of these are very typical reactions. So that's the in. That's the in aspect of emotional facility. Out is the free flow of responsible expression so that emotions complete themselves, bringing you into greater contact with yourself and others. Most models of emotional intelligence, what they teach is down-regulating and suppressing your feelings so that you can stay in greater rapport with people. But this model assumes that expression increases intimacy. Now, we do have to pick our time and place. I'm not saying we should fully express our anger in the classroom, but we do need to find a time and a place to address those powerful feelings that we have. Out can also include name it to tame it, which was, the phrase was coined by Daniel Goleman. The original research was done by Matthew Lieberman, and we study both of those thinkers at the Wright Graduate University. It can also include, as I just mentioned, finding somebody to express with so that you can get that responsible expression out. I sometimes go to a colleague at my school and either talk to her or I just lean on her a little bit if she's available, because I want that support for myself. The up element of emotional facility is upregulating. It's getting your motor running when it is running low. It also increases enhancing our awareness and experience of positive affect. We all know children, of course, who we think need to upregulate, but I know I need to upregulate sometimes, and I bet most of us do also, especially gotta fake joy over those trilobites. The down direction is down-regulating. It's soothing. It's calming oneself. It can be containing emotions until you can be in an appropriate space to express them. It's more than just suppression. For me, I find myself talking sweetly to myself at times. I'll say to myself, oh, you're really angry about that. Why don't you just sit down for a moment and not say anything? Or, this is hard. I'll say to myself, you can do it. That's okay, you can do it. So that's the model of emotional, the 4 directions of emotional facility. And I'll give you an example of that in just a couple of minutes, because I wanted to talk about this model also. This is the Wright Developmental Model that was developed by Dr. Bob Wright, who is the other co-founder of the Wright Graduate University and one of the professors. And this model, I know it looks complex, and I'm going to say a few things briefly about it. It is a map of human consciousness. And like a map of the United States, it is very helpful to know where you are in order to get where you want to go. So these are different levels of consciousness. The model has 3 axes. It has a developmental axis. It has an existential axis of existential principles and choice. And it also has an Adlerian axis down on the bottom of different areas of life. Now, I know it looks like a stair. And when people see a stair model like this, they think, oh, the goal is to get to the top. That's not the case with this model. We have to find a way to depict the model, but it works more like a spiral where, depending on your outer circumstances, different levels will get activated at different times. And the assumption here is that we're having all the feelings all the time. It's just a matter of which one is rising to the surface and what need we need to meet. So the goal is not getting to the top. The goal is to know where you are. There is an emotion associated with the first 3 levels. The first level has the emotion of fear, the second level is hurt, and the third level is anger. And I want to talk about those a little bit. Level 1, the emotion is fear. This level tells us that we have a survival need that is not being met. And for a teacher, that can be, I'm afraid of losing my job. I'm afraid a parent is going to yell at me. There are so many children and they won't do what I say. They're not doing what my training said they would do. But it's also this deep fear we have of being inadequate. That's a survival feeling, like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm not enough. That's a level 1 feeling. Also, not having enough time. Anybody ever have that experience where you don't have enough time, where you don't have enough resources? Those are all level 1 kinds of experiences. Level 2, the primary emotion is hurt. We have a hunger need that is not being met. And when we meet it, we feel affirmed. We get affirmation. Now, affirmation is a human need. It's not just a good idea or a thing that feels good. Absence of affirmation is deeply harmful to human development, and it is also deeply harmful to adults. Yet, it is not the children's job to affirm us. And if we assume that it is their job, we are going to be sorely disappointed, although we are affirmed many times, but it is not their job. And so we need a plan for how to either seek affirmation from someone who can give it to us, or to learn how to do it internally so that you're fine. You are affirming yourself even in the face of the children disaffirming you. Level 3, the primary feeling is anger. Now, most often, as Dan on the web pointed out earlier, we are angry because we are hurt, or we are angry because we're afraid. It's kind of a knee-jerk response to being hurt or afraid. So it tells us that there is a hunger need that you don't have enough affirmation, or it tells us that there's a survival need. It can also indicate we really want something to be different. So I have a couple of examples. We're entering story time now. When I'm working with teachers, it can be a good idea to have some story time. So I have examples of using the 4 directions of emotional facility, as well as using the Wright Developmental Model in the moment, in the classroom, for my benefit and for the children's benefit. So my first example comes from my very early years of teaching. I had a boss who was actually very much like my mother. She was strong, she was opinionated, she was tough as nails, and she was very thorough. And in those days, we had a PA system in the school. And she would sometimes say over the PA system, "Mrs. Sanden, please come to the office." And no matter what else was happening, I would immediately think, I'm in trouble, a parent is mad at me, I'm getting fired, this is the end of my career, what am I doing next? And all the way from my classroom to the office, I would be in this looped, terrified, level 1 fear and survival mode on the way to the classroom, on the way to her office. So one day, knowing about emotional facility, knowing about the out direction of emotional facility, and also having down-regulated and soothed myself enough that I felt I could talk to her, I said, you know, whenever you call my name on the PA system, I'm sure I've done something wrong. I'm sure I'm in trouble, and it's really hard for me to hear that. And we sort of had a little chuckle about it, because it was kind of funny that, you know, I'm a good teacher, and I know I'm a good teacher, and yet I also have this thinking. And then we had our whatever conversation she wanted to have, and I went on my way. About 3 weeks later, I hear, "Mrs. Sanden, please come to the office." And I go through this thinking, oh no, I'm in trouble, now I'm fired, what's my next career? I could always work at Aldi. And I get to the office, and she says, "I just got a box of Coralie toffee. Would you like a piece?" And I said, "Sure. What do you need to talk about?" She said, "That's it." And then I, bewildered, went back to my class. Several weeks later, same thing. But, so I know she was sort of using behaviorism to train me to think differently, but if I hadn't told her, if I hadn't down-regulated myself enough that I could talk to her about it, if I hadn't reassured myself, if I wasn't aware of that fear, and if I hadn't just spoken about it, that never would have happened. And we didn't have the PA system forever, but by the time we got rid of it, I was really at about 50-50. I'm either being called for chocolate, or I'm in trouble. It was one or the other. And I know if we'd had the PA system longer, I could have made it probably to 75%. So that's really about using the 4 directions of emotional facility for my personal benefit and my relationship with my boss. And it wasn't like a blurting out of my emotions. It was very professional, but it met my need. So my other example has a little bit more complexity to it. So there's I had this 3.5-year-old girl. She is somewhere between 3.5 and 4. And she wore a tulle skirt every day. And she was this girl is a pistol. She is smart, and she is certain, and she's got her tulle skirt on. And she has a posse of 3 to 5 other 3.5 to 4-year-old girls, and they also march around in their tulle skirts. And they would follow her around, and they would watch her color, and they would admire her coloring, and then they would go off and they would do a little thing together, and then they would just walk around the classroom surveying at 3.5. They would never work independently, which it's funny, in Montessori we have these very clear directives, and one of them is that the youngest members of the class are supposed to work independently. And so, of course, my Montessori hackles are up, but I'm also like really agitated by this and I don't really understand why I'm agitated. If they were separated, like if one went to snack and the others didn't, then immediately after the separation, they were like magnets right back together. Now, in Montessori terms, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that I tried forcibly separating them, which I knew wasn't really the best option. I know enough. I tried to entice them to come and work with me sometimes, which they did. They all were lovely, actually, at receiving lessons from me. I helped them find things to work on that were appropriate for them to do together. And sometimes that all worked just fine, but at some point I realized I am spending a tremendous amount of my day thinking about this little posse in tulle, and it was way too much time, and it was way too upsetting for me. You know, I even tried ignoring them. But you know when you try to ignore something, all you can think about is that thing, so that was totally ineffective. So I started to, when I realized I was having something happening over here, that it wasn't all about what was happening there, I started to get really curious about what was happening inside of me. And one day, as I was ready to get out of my chair and go do something about this little posse who were walking around together, I decided, no, Lisa, sit down. Sit down and pay attention to what's happening inside of you. So I knew that I was angry. That was very clear to me. But I got curious about the anger too, because I know the Wright Developmental Model, which I showed you a little bit earlier. I know that there's something else underneath the anger. So what was my anger about? What was actually happening? And as I sat there, and it wasn't even that long, I maybe sat for 5 minutes, maybe 7, it wasn't a very long time. The answer that hit most deeply home for me was that I had always wanted to be one of them. And I never was. I had always wanted that kind of a tight-knit group. I'd always wanted to be one of the popular kids. And I'd always wanted that kind of just, that affirmation. These girls, they didn't have to do anything to love each other. They just did. And I'd always really yearned for that unconditional affirmation that they got from each other. And this may sound, I don't know, crazy to some of you. I was jealous. Frankly, I was jealous. I was jealous of their little group. And my primary feeling, it wasn't anger. My primary feeling was hurt. And once I understood what was happening inside of me, I was way better able to soothe myself and to say, you know, things like, you're okay, you've got friends like that. You know, and I could buy a tulle skirt if I want to. And I could separate what was happening here from what was happening over there, which was really, really important. You know, I saw that this was a very old feeling from my childhood that I hadn't yet resolved, and that I actually could meet those needs. And I think that this is what Dr. Montessori was actually talking about when she said that we have to learn from the children about ourselves. And so I want to just correlate this to the things that we've been talking about. I did that short but very deep work to really understand what was happening inside of me. I down-regulated myself enough. I used the Wright Developmental Model. I saw where I was, which was anger. I came to understand that I was actually hurt. And what's happened is that this little girl and I have one of the strongest relationships that I have with anybody in the classroom. We have a relationship that is filled with humor, it's filled with respect, and we really delight in one another's company now. And so, you know, this is the deep acting element of emotional labor. So I didn't just have to pretend I wasn't angry, I could actually resolve it within myself in a span of 5 to 7 minutes. So I hope you have gotten a glimpse of the power and importance of all emotions in education, not just those select happy few, and that emotions are important not just for our relationships with the children, but also for coming to a deeper understanding of ourselves. I hope you got a sense of what it may take to develop yourself as a teacher and a leader in this very emotional job. Emotions have the power to deeply transform us. They have the power to deeply transform the children and our relationships with the children. So thank you very much for coming today. And thank you on the web so much for being here. Mwah.